So for my latest video, I wanted to talk about panic attacks. And I thought this would be a really good video for me to do, since this is really what started my entire, mental health journey for the last 21 years. It was also my initial diagnosis was that of panic disorder. So that was the whole start of everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a little bit of a history of my experience with panic attacks. And I'm doing this because I think it'll be helpful if you are someone out there who is having panic attacks. First of all, a lot of the time we might not even realize what's going on initially. Maybe we're thinking we're having a heart attack or some other physiological illness that's, come upon us. But I just wanted to go over the, basically my journey and how this all unfolded. As I've told in my initial introductory video, my first panic attack was my longest panic attack. And because I didn't know what it was also my most terrifying. I was driving home from Montreal, and I had to pull off, and then I got in the passenger seat and proceeded to be in the fetal position for a little under an hour. Well, adrenaline just dumped through my body, and I felt as though I was dying the entire time. I fought it because obviously at the time I was only 31 and I didn't feel like cashing out, and that just made it worse. But so that was my first one that I had. And then since then, and for there's a 6-year period there where I had hundreds of panic attacks. And I had them at my job. I would come up with a reason why I had to leave, or, find a place where I could go, maybe even if I just walked out to the parking lot, where I could have a panic attack. And if I felt too detached afterwards, then I would just leave and say I wasn't feeling well. I was actually fortunate that I had an employer that was relatively accommodating to, missing time, at least within the confines of their policies at the time. So I had that happen. I also had panic attacks, a lot of them, while I was driving. And this is a complicated place to have a panic attack. And before I go any further, why don't I talk about what panic attacks have felt like for me? So you'll read panic attacks, you'll say, oh, racing heart, you might feel dizzy. I think the people out there who have them can tell you that it's impending doom, it's imminent death. That's the feeling. In order to get you to comprehend it, if you haven't had a panic attack, have you had the wind knocked out of you for a long period of time? You know that feeling? Well, multiply that times about 50, and that's how a panic attack feels. You have impending doom. You also, this one other wonderful aspect of panic disorders is that, of panic attacks, is that you detach from your surroundings. So your environment starts to not feel real. It feels as though you're fading away. And even the people in your environment feel as though they're fading away. This is just how mine are. These are the ones that I've had. And they're horrifying. They are, these are those fight or flight chemicals. They're horrifying, and, it completely debilitated me, completely. I had a hard time driving. I was working just enough to keep my job. It was not a good time in my life. And, again, just so thankful that I chose to share my life with somebody who, believes in sticking with you through thick and thin, because I was a shell of a man. I was a shell of a husband. I was a shell of a father. But she stayed with me through this, even though I think she had an idea what was going on before I did. And then after, a couple of years in, I started to figure out what this really was. Anyways, there's another type of panic attack that I had, and this is one I don't hear talked about a lot, and it is not one that you're going to be able to use any techniques to control. It's a nocturnal, specifically while you're sleeping panic attack. And I've only thankfully had one of these, but it was life-changing. You wake up with that same detached, horrific feeling that you're dying, but you're waking up. So you can't reorient yourself. You can't even just tell yourself, oh, it's a panic attack, because you just went from being asleep to awake. And this happened to me one time. I was vigorously pacing the apartment we lived in at the time, basically just praying not to die. And it was horrible, and I didn't feel connected to my surroundings in any meaningful way for months afterwards. And I also became incredibly terrified to fall asleep because of what had happened. In fact, it's like my mind remembered that, and I would start to fall asleep, and I would wake up and I would jump. So it was terrible. And it went on that way for a couple of years. Then my first attempt to get treated for my condition, I was, I would say, mistreated. The psychiatrist, and I'll just describe them this way, they clearly were not in it for the patient. They had zero empathy for the patient, and they were clearly in it for one reason, and that was to make money. The stereotypical psychiatrist you see in the movies, where the person's talking to them and they're doodling or eating or calling someone else on the phone and going, Well, this is pretty much how this person interacted with me. And they also threw me on, I felt like almost like a guinea pig with the pharmaceutical intervention that they were trying. And one of the drugs I took was horrible, and another one of the drugs I took was awful. And my interaction with this gentleman was not good. So I did that for about 4 or 5 months, and then I stopped. And I went on for, 4 more years, having panic attacks, convinced that I was dying, convinced that there was something underlying that the doctors hadn't found. I had every kind of test you could imagine, just every systemic disease checked, every, CAT scan, all of these things checked. And I know that I must have frustrated my primary care doctor, and he was really nice. And I was always very grateful to the fact that he let me say what I said, even though I'm sure he knew. He told me, and the last time I saw him, he says, I don't think your problems are physiological. And he actually gave me the number to the mental health professional that really helped me turn the corner. This was 6 years after my first panic attack. And I went to see this guy. I had very low expectations at this point, but I had started to experience severe derealization and depersonalization. I felt I was on the verge of perhaps having a psychotic break. So out of sheer desperation, I got that number from my primary, and it changed my life. He also used 2 drugs. I'll never mention specific drugs on here because we are all different, And I don't want somebody hearing me say a specific drug and think that's going to be some type of miracle or panacea for them. Work with a mental health professional. You know, I am not a doctor. Work with a mental health professional. Anyways, I got put on 2 drugs. You know, one is a very old drug, but it worked very well for me to keep my moods from going way up and way down. And, you know, I one SSRI and one benzo, but this benzo is a slower acting benzo. And he also told me how to take it, which was, instead of taking a whole dose, splitting the dose. This really made it so that I was able to get through work. Within about 6 weeks, I had almost no panic attacks. So this was really good. This was really good. So about in about 6 weeks, I was able to my panic attacks came to nearly a halt. And once this happened, it's amazing how liberating that becomes. But the genius of the mental health professional that I was working with is he knew not to entertain my anxiety when I would come and talk to him. I tell him, you know, oh, I had a panic attack at work and I almost went home. And he'd say, but you stayed? And I say, yeah. And he says, see, that's what you have to keep doing. It's okay to have a panic attack. Just keep going. And just having that mindset was really helpful. Now, there were other things that I did to really start to get better from the panic disorder, from the generalized anxiety. And, you know, during those 6 years, I also had horrible intrusive thought, obsessive compulsive disorder. But the next thing I did is, at this time, I should also tell you guys that I was approximately 350 pounds, give or take. And so I went and I had a sleep study done. And sure enough, I had sleep apnea, not a surprise given my weight. And I got this treated. I got a BiPAP machine. And I noticed quite a difference when I started using the BiPAP machine in the quality of my sleep. I noticed that my mind, I was able to think more clearly. Even my memory started to improve again. So if you are having panic disorder or panic attacks, and you aren't sure whether or not you're sleeping well, or maybe your partner says you're snoring, definitely have a sleep study done, because you need to get sleep with any of these mental health conditions. That is a super key to getting better, is getting not just quantity of sleep, but quality of sleep. So I did that, and that had a really big effect. And after I started using the machine and started sleeping better, then I was able to start exercising again. And I had somewhat exercised a little bit in maybe 07 and 08, but still wasn't really able to work out. And then after I got treated in 09, I started really working out again, really, you know, lifting weights. And I also, in 2010, I started to focus on diet, and I lost 100 pounds. And these things also, it just made it easier and easier not to be consumed with panic. Because if you start having a panic attack, it's easier to dismiss it as a panic attack if you're not morbidly obese and think you're maybe having some type of cardiac event or something. So I lost 100 pounds, and I felt so much better. And for about 8 years, you know, I'd have an occasional panic attack or some bad days, but not anything too bad. And, you know, it was a pretty good time. We had our third child I kept the weight off for the most part, and I was doing well. But I have had 2 relapses, and how they happened in 2018 and 2020. Now, as far as continuing with how I got better, so I already told you guys, I went and saw a psychiatrist. I got on medication that helped. I got my sleep straightened out. I started exercising. I lost weight. But I also had to do my own exposure and cognitive behavioral therapy. I had to. So all of the situations that triggered my panic, and I'll give you a list of them. Things that triggered my panic: driving, exercising, being in crowds, being alone, far away from home, being around certain friends and family, especially those who I felt like I could not show my weakness around. You know, you might have friends like that or family like that where you really don't want to show yourself as vulnerable around them. Though that was another thing. Traveling. So what did I do? I forced myself to do these things. Now, this is important. You don't go from 0 to 100. Don't do that. That won't go well. If you're going from not exercising because it triggers panic to, trying to, complete a marathon, it's not going to go well for you. Like for me, I didn't start, trying to drive across the country. I got so, okay, instead of going the shortest way home from work, take a longer way home. Instead of going a route where there's no traffic, go where it's busy. Just forced myself to stretch myself out and prove to my intellectual mind that there was no reason for the fear that I had had and for the panic attacks that I had had. It's a process. You have to work at it because your mind has made a subconscious association with these things. And it could be people, it can be a situation, it can be driving, it can be being in crowds, it can be traveling, all these things. Anything that's out of my normal, daily routine would be something that would trigger, could trigger panic attacks. On that note, though, I want to also explain, if people think that panic attacks are always triggered by a situation, some of my worst panic attacks were not triggered by situations. In fact, they would happen when I was having a good time, and they'd be completely out of the blue. So I know that anticipatory thinking was not part of the equation for me. Yes, there were times when it was, when I would work myself up and then, sure enough, shocker, I would have a panic attack. But a lot of the time, there was no anticipatory thinking at all. Obviously, while I was sleeping, how can you blame that on anticipatory thinking? All I was thinking about before I went to sleep that night was that I had to work the next morning. I mean, I guess that could cause you a level of stress, but I certainly shouldn't have shot me into a panic attack. So, anyways, that's pretty much, so I had to expose myself to these things and build myself up and keep doing it and keep proving to myself that these situations weren't dangerous, along with my medication, along with, the 3 things I mentioned in all my videos: getting sufficient quality and quantity of sleep, getting sufficient exercise, and eating in a way where it doesn't control you, where you're not eating to self-medicate. Whatever diet you choose, that is entirely up to you. Different diets work for different people, but you want to be able to have control over food, not have food have control over you. And that will really help, in controlling things like anxiety and panic attacks. So, The the other thing that I wanted to mention here is that's been instrumental in me getting better. First of all, I started to touch on it, but I've had 2 relapses. I had one in 2018. A lot of stress going on externally. Working a schedule where I was getting very little sleep. And sure enough, I started to have a few panic attacks, but a lot of generalized anxiety and depression. And then with the wonderful pandemic that we had, that I had right before that, I had started to go off my medication completely. I was 4 months off. I wanted to try to do it without medication. And, I couldn't have timed it worse. A global pandemic, all of the routines that I used to keep stability in my life and to control things were removed. I couldn't exercise at the gym. I couldn't visit people. It was just you guys all know what it was like. It was terrible. And it's especially terrible for people who tend to rely on routines and who have a hard time with change. So it affected my sleep, my exercise, everything. And I ended up having tremendous health anxiety and along with that, some panic attacks. It wasn't fun. But I've gotten through it. I've gotten back into good habits. And that's really why I make these videos and why I'm making this one. I want to give you guys what I've done to get through this, because it's not, I know it'd be great if it was a cure. You do this and it's gone, and there are some people, God bless them, who they just one day get up and start living their lives and they act like they never have a problem with it again. And, more power to them. If something happened in with either their brain chemistry or the way they're responding to stress, that's a great thing. But that's not how it's been for me. I have to continue to work at it. I have to continue to rely on things that I know will get me through it. As far as, sleep, exercise, and controlling my eating. And I also, another thing, and this is so important if you guys are having panic attacks or trying to recover from it, allow yourself to have a bad day. If you ended up having a panic attack or just woke up in one day, it felt like you went back to ground zero, don't let that dishearten you. It's one day. It's one day. Find the person you love, give them a hug, and wake up and remember that each day is its own day. And that has helped me so much. There have been days when, I'm like, oh, what's going on here? But then I tell myself, listen, it's one day. It's one day. You have to learn to compartmentalize. We tend to be control freaks, and we tend to be all or nothing. Your recovery is probably not going to be linear. It's probably going to be better, a little worse. Better, a little worse. That's the way mine was. And it always takes work. If you're neurotypical and you don't have these mental health conditions, you just live your life. You don't worry about these things. But if you have generalized anxiety or panic disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder, you know what I'm talking about. And it's going to take work. You're always going to have to put in the work and make sure that you're exposing yourself in a controlled way to your triggers, that you're using good habits with sleep, exercise, and diet. And, you're always going to have to be able to allow yourself to have a bad day. There's going to be things you can't control. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're going back to the bottom. It just means you had a bad day or a bad week or a bad month. It's okay. And if you keep that mentality and you stick close to the people that you love and who love you, and it's unconditional, you'll get through it. You'll get through it. It's hard. And there's days that it's really hard. But I've gotten through it, and you can get through it too. That's pretty much what I wanted to say in this video. The panic attacks are so awful, you wouldn't wish them on your worst enemy. And for someone who's never had one, they can't possibly know. That's one of those things I really feel like if you've never had one, you wouldn't know. There's no way to articulate exactly how horrible it is. I've done my best in this video to do that. I just want to take this opportunity again to thank you guys so much for the support you've shown for my channel. It's been great. The comments, they've been so good. It's so nice to hear that there's people out there that appreciate the videos and appreciate someone talking about it, because I see a lot of good channels on YouTube, you know, mental health channels, but it's therapists, it's people who haven't gone through it. And not that there's anything wrong with that. They're good. But this is a different perspective. I can assure you guys that I've been through the fire, and I can also assure you guys I never feel like I'm, you know, completely scot-free. I know that I'm going to have to work at this for the, you know, rest of my days. And that's okay. You know, I'm up for it. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope somebody gets something out of this video. Oh, last thing before I go. I don't know how I didn't mention this. If you're having a panic attack, I've said this in my other video, but if you're having a panic attack, the worst thing you can do, absolute worst thing you can do is fight it. Don't fight it. Let it happen. That was one of the instrumental things, and you know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. For a long time there, during those 6 years, I fought my panic attacks. I fled my panic attacks. Once I learned to just let them happen, which is so hard because it feels like you are dying. And who wants to just let themselves die, right? I don't know. Too many people just want to let themselves die. I'm certainly not that type. So I fought it. I fought it with everything I had, and it intensified the heck out of my panic attacks. So if you get nothing else out of this video, listen to me. If you're having a panic attack, let it happen. It's scary, but believe it or not, it'll lessen. It'll instantly start to lessen if you just let it happen and don't fight it. So I almost forgot to mention that. Anyways, thank you guys so much again for your support. And until my next video, take care.